Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we are continuing to preview all 32 teams for the upcoming NFL season. Today we are now moving on to the AFC North, and we are going to be starting with the Baltimore Ravens, who were, I would say, almost unquestionably, during the regular season at least, the best team in the NFL. And I think that you can still make an argument, although they lost to the Chiefs, that they were undoubtedly in that top three and were a prime Super Bowl contender, which is why it was definitely a disappointment for the Ravens when they fell short in the AFC Championship game. And I was really disappointed, not because I'm anti-Chiefs or anything, but because I did think that this was going to be the redemption story we were waiting for with Lamar Jackson, because it had been a number of years since we really saw Lamar at the peak of his powers. He missed the second half of the previous two seasons in 2021 and 22, so we hadn't gotten a playoff performance from him since 2020 and the weird COVID year. So, overall, I think that it was a lot of time that went between the last time we saw Lamar in the playoffs and this season, and people were holding the playoff choker title over him, I think unfairly, because we have seen him dramatically improve as a passer over the course of the past few years, but he hasn't been healthy at the right times. And Lamar went on to win his second MVP award, so he was incredible during the regular season. I don't think that his coaches really did him any favors in that Chiefs playoff game. The fact that the Kansas City's defense was elite, but the one area they were able to be exposed a little bit was in the run game, and the Ravens just entirely abandoned it. And I thought it was a bad call there. And as a result, it kind of gets pinned on Lamar, and we're sitting here saying, well, he hasn't done anything in the playoffs yet, which sure is true, but he's also still just 26 years old, turning 27, or just turned 27-year-old, heading into his 27-year-old season. And, he has won multiple MVPs. His resume is already elite. And this is something that I don't want to spend too much time on now, because we're going to go more in depth with the Lamar conversation next offseason, or next segment, I should say. But Lamar has been proving the doubters wrong essentially from day one, and it's something that I'm really on board with. I feel like the opportunity is going to come through for him, and again, I just, he's somebody that I wasn't necessarily all that high on either as he was coming into the league, but he absolutely won me over. Especially, it was, I think, really from that Texans game on in the first game of the year when you saw him just sort of slinging it, it's so clear that he's an improved passer. And no, he's not prototypical, and his backbone probably is a little bit more run heavy than throwing the ball itself, but I mean, the guy can throw now, so he's scary for any opposing defense, and NFL fans need to respect him, I think, in the same way that other teams do. But when you look at the overall numbers for the Ravens offense last season, very good across the board. Obviously, the number one thing for them is that prolific rush attack. They were the number one run offense in the league, and I know the passing numbers don't look great at 21st, but part of that, I think, 100% plays into the fact that they ran for 156.5 rush yards per game, which is over 15 more than the second best team, which was the Bears. So while everybody is going into this air raid attack, the Ravens have a prolific run game, also with the fact that Lamar now can throw as well, but that rush attack is what their identity is, and I felt like they sort of turned away from that in the playoffs when it mattered most. So I'm sure they would like to have that one back. But we're talking about the number one rush offense in the NFL last season, and then you add on into that one of the premier running backs of his generation in Derrick Henry, who was, of course, the big offseason signing for the Ravens, and I think that it is a perfect fit into what the Ravens are already doing. Now, what I did like last year, and you saw it some with Justice Hill and Gus Edwards, that they were operating some sort of a passing out of the backfield as well. That was especially, apparent during the playoffs, I think, when their receivers weren't getting it done. Now, I don't think it was the design that it was going to be so heavy with the running backs in the receiving game. That's not really Derrick Henry's MO. And it's something that, is going to lead to the opening of an elite play action offense, and NFL defenses are going to be sort of shaking, trying to defend the run and then getting thrown over as well. It's going to be very difficult to get a hold on this Baltimore offense this upcoming year. And Derrick Henry, I love the addition. Again, would be nice to see. I'm not sure necessarily what they have here, as I can double check what their depth chart looks like, because, ultimately the backup running backs, they still have Justice Hill. I actually forgot about Keaton Mitchell, who was a, massive splash for them up until he almost immediately got hurt as he was getting himself going. But, I think that overall here, when you look at the offense, they have a lot of good skill position players, but one of the bigger issues for them next year is going to be the fact that they are managing with 3 new offensive linemen. During the offseason, they lost John Simpson, Morgan Moses, and Kevin Zietler. So they're both of their guards and their right tackle. And as of right now, there's still a lot of questions as to who can take over in those spots. Ben Cleveland is probably the most likely candidate to take over at least one of those jobs, likely at right guard, somebody who's been with the team for the past few seasons and has gotten some starts under his belt. I could say the same for Patrick McElroy, who is the tackle prospect / guard that has been sort of hanging around the Ravens for a couple years now, has been with the team, so he could look to take over a spot. There's also Daniel Fa'alele, who is another potential option for them. Both McElroy and Fa'alele are the projected starters on a post from the Baltimore Ravens themselves that they made back in March. Now, since then, they have drafted Roger Rosengarten in the second round, who is a very capable candidate to take over that right tackle position. ESPN also has Andrew Voorhees as the projected left guard. He was a 7th round selection in 2023. So there are definitely questions there coming off of a good group last season. Sharp Football Analysis has them ranked as the 16th best O-line for the upcoming season, tied with the 49ers. So just around average. With the rest of the weapons on this offense, average might just be enough for this offensive line group, but we will see. Defensively, see the numbers on the screen there. The Ravens were the number 1 scoring defense in the league last year and the number 2 red zone defense. They did have a couple losses on the year that definitely don't feel great necessarily, but we saw the way that Mike Macdonald, and also the fact that even Mike Macdonald is gone in the offseason. Probably should have included that in my key losses graphic here, but Jadeveon Clowney and Patrick Queen are the 2 personnel players themselves that are going into that left in free agency, and we'll have to see, how the Ravens are able to replace that. And I think that they're going to be capable of it. Zach Orr taking over as the defensive coordinator for the Ravens. It's definitely going to be a change. I'm sure we're going to see some sort of a step back, but ultimately they still have 3 elite players at each, they have an elite player at each of the 3 levels. Justin Madubuike up front, who they just re-signed this offseason, Roquan Smith at linebacker, and Kyle Hamilton, one of my personal favorite players in the NFL, in the secondary, and a number of other veteran talent players as well on that defense, where you look at a Kyle Van Noy, who actually stepped up big for them last year. You have also Marlon Humphrey, a number of guys. But some of the younger core as well is going to have to take over. We've seen Odafe Owe become a big contributor for them, and they are likely going to have Trenton Simpson, the third round pick, I should say, out of Clemson, in that starting lineup as well. But, as we continue on here, looking at the Ravens' upcoming schedule, you can see the beginning of the season is really going to be their toughest stretch. They start with the Chiefs week 1 in the rematch, or not the rematch, but I believe that is going to be the opening game of the season. So that's obviously a lot of eyes on them there, but a lot of other tough out-of-divisional opponents as well early on. They're going to be at Dallas and against the Bills at home. Not to mention then they get their first divisional game in Cincinnati against the Bengals. You're never going to have an easy schedule ahead of you when you are in a division that's as talented as the AFC North is, and the Sharp Football analysis would back that up by ranking the Ravens as the 4th hardest strength of schedule. But this is a team that should very much be able to compete. You look at how they handled their division last year. They were 2-0 against the Cincinnati Bengals. They played in week 2 where Burrow was clearly still not the same version of himself. He was recovering from that calf injury. And then the Thursday Night Football game in Week 11 where Burrow suffered his season-ending wrist injury. So they went 2-0 against the Bengals, but Cincinnati's going to be much more of a threat, I would say, in this upcoming season with a fully healthy Joe Burrow. The Ravens also split with both the Browns and the Steelers last year. Again, that division is just a tough one to work your way through. So overall, when you look at this Ravens schedule, they also have a couple other tough out-of-division opponents against the Eagles in Week 13. And then I would probably also throw Houston in Week 17 into that conversation, a rematch of last year's AFC divisional round. We'll see who's really still playing at that point. But I think because of the fact that the Ravens schedule is pretty tough ahead of them, they're going to have success, but I actually have them going under their season total. Their current line is at 11.5 wins. I have them just under at 11-6. Still a very good record, going to be at the top of the AFC and a very good chance to have the 1 seed as a whole, but they have a number 1 seed schedule this upcoming season. They're going to have some tough games along the way, and are going to have to deal with some level of turnover as well, but I do think that they're going to be capable for it. So I have them at 11-6, and just sort of adding that to the updates of all of the other records that we have performed, or that we have predicted up to this point. I have the Ravens tied with the Bills for the best record as things currently stand. We are just sort of going this day by day, so I don't necessarily have I haven't dove into just yet all of these other teams, but Ravens in a pretty good position there, and I feel like the majority of people would say that they have a great chance to run it back and become the 1 seed in the AFC once again. But definitely be sure to let me know what you think will be the case for the upcoming season with the Ravens. But I do want to circle back a little bit to the conversation around Lamar Jackson and where he currently stands from a legacy perspective after winning his 2nd MVP last season. So we are going to be taking our next break here, but when we come back, we will be diving more into that. We will be right back. Stick with us.